Creativity is one of the most important capabilities that we have. It helps us to come up with better solutions to the problems, see different opportunities around us, and of course become more adaptable to different life challenges. Hi, my name is Alex. I'm a registered architect in UK, and today we're going to be looking at how we can cultivate the ability to become more creative. The basic definition of creativity that I like to use is this ability to bring two or more ideas in a meaningful way in order to create another idea or a solution to a problem. So I think this is a very healthy way to look at what creativity is, because it shows us that it's not only the most talented people that can have that capacity, but actually anyone can cultivate that ability. So in other words, creativity is not this magic gift or a talent that comes from somewhere. It's actually a skill that can be developed. One other thing to note when talking about creativity is that it's associated with the trait openness. And trait openness is one of these 5 personality traits that are used to group people's behavior and people's personalities. And so another example of that would be extroversion, introversion, agreeableness, and also neuroticism, and I forget the last one. But openness really is to do with our inner capacity, our innate kind of capability of taking in information and absorbing it. And so that's really critical when it comes to creativity. So the opposite of openness is actually stubbornness. And stubbornness can have its own benefits if we have dedicated ourselves to do something and we need to finish that task. Stubbornness is actually quite good because it then prevents all the intrusive ideas coming in and not finishing that task that we set ourselves to finish. Whereas openness actually works better if we need to get the new information, new ideas, and come up with novel ways to solve different problems. So why is this important? Well, because on the slider of openness on one end and stubbornness on the other, we are all in different positions. And so if somebody is perceived to be talented or creative, that might be to do with the fact that they're just more open, their personality is more open than somebody who is more stubborn. And it's easier for them to be more creative, to take new information in. Whereas for somebody who is a bit more stubborn, that's not necessarily the case. The good thing is that we all can intentionally become more open and more creative if we put effort into it. The other reason why it's important, I think, is because it shows us that it's important to not compare ourselves to somebody else if we think that that person is talented and that they're doing a better job, because it might be that they just have that unfair advantage of being biologically predisposed to be more creative. However, what is useful is to compare ourselves to our previous version, our previous selves that are less creative, and then incrementally improve that. So let's look at some of the ways we can actually do that practically. One way to think about creativity is it's a kind of like a mental muscle in your brain that can be trained. And similar to going to the gym, creative improvement is also incremental because we can train it, but what we cannot do is we cannot get there instantly. It's going to happen, but it's going to happen slowly and it's going to happen gradually. And so keeping that in mind, it's important to understand that overnight success is impossible. So keeping that in mind, what we really need to do is focus then on the process rather than the outcome. So focusing on the process means we have to forget about being perfectionistic and trying to make that poetry or blog post or anything else perfect. All we have to really do, focus on the process. The first thing we need to do is we need to pick a time that we're going to be working. For example, 7 to 9 p.m. would suit somebody who has a full-time job. And then every day in that same time frame, for those 2 hours, we sit down and we do work. This process would be on some kind of repetitive basis that we can do every day, ideally. For the same amount of time, and hopefully we can also do that in the same time frame, in the same time of day. And so once we pick that time, we need to pick the place where we're going to be working at. Again, should be the same place. Ideally, if there's a separate room that you can turn into an office or a studio space, that's perfect. If not, the minimum is to have at least a desk. I have a desk here in the living room, just behind me, where I do my work. That space, whether it's an office space or it's a desk, it should be ideally clean, free of any distractions like phones, different objects, gadgets, and also people around us should be mindful that we're doing this creative work and that it actually requires concentration to do it well. There's actually a quite good book written on this subject, which is called Atomic Habits, that talks in detail about how to best achieve this daily ritual on the consistent basis and how to avoid being distracted. So after some time, what typically happens is that we hit a rut. We hit a point where we kind of are stuck in our routine. We're stuck in the ways we're doing things, and it's really difficult to get out of that rut sometimes. Ideas don't come easily, and there's all sorts of things that are other things that are on our mind, and it's difficult to come up with inspiration and actually enjoy what we're doing. In those cases, to prevent that sort of thing happening in the first place, but also to get out of the rut once it's happening, what's important to remember is that ideas require our subconscious brain to process different inputs that we put into it. And so if we are in that space where nothing comes to us, it's a good idea to preload our brain with different inputs. And so that can be walking to museums, walking to exhibition spaces, looking up other artists' work, looking for that inspiration, reading books, reading blog posts, watching YouTube videos, doing all those things to just fill your head up with different sources of inspiration. We can also look into different disciplines for that matter. It doesn't have to be just painting. If you're painting, you can go and look for inspiration in music or theater or some other type of production where it's completely different from what you usually are used to. And that should help the brain to come up with unusual connections that otherwise would not have happened if we just sat at our desk all the time. So that's one way. The alternative of having to load your brain with different information, if that's not helpful or maybe actually is detrimental to what we're trying to achieve, creates too many ideas and it's distracting, then the alternative to that would be to try to empty your head from all the ideas to actually get into a state of boredom. And it's most effective for writers, but I think it also works for other creatives as well. So what we want to do if we want to get to a state of boredom is basically remove all the distractions that we have. In the extreme cases, I know some writers lock themselves up in a hotel room. They don't have a phone, they don't have internet access, they have nothing but their typewriter or a computer that just has a word processing program. And what they do, they're allowed to do two things. They're either allowed to look out of the window and look around the room, be bored, or they're allowed to write. Those are the only two things that they're allowed to do. And there's going to be a point where looking around is just going to be too boring, and actually sitting down and writing something is more exciting. So that's the alternative way to look at this problem of not having ideas, is to actually force yourself to be boring and to become childlike in your imagination and coming up with different new ideas and inspirations and storylines that you can then develop into something better, hopefully in a good quality artwork. So that's basically covers how we can be more creative, as this idea of establishing a habit and then looking for inspiration or looking for that boredom. That's kind of is the core concept. The other thing I think is worth to remember is that all art disciplines, no matter if it's music, visual arts, graphic design, architecture, you name it, all of them have a same basic high-level concept that can be applied to all of them. They share the same type of approach. There's a notion of composition, there's an understanding of an order and specific approach to an art that hopefully creates some kind of emotional expression in the viewer. So there's these things that govern all these art subjects in the same way. However, to get to that level, to actually express those things through your artwork, one must pick a specific discipline, because in specific technical knowledge we get to that point of higher level achievement. What that means is that to be truly professional in our creative endeavors and our creative pursuits, we actually have to start with something specific and something that really detailed. And it's perhaps as counterintuitive in some ways, because if somebody thinks of a creative person, then they think that that person does 50,000 different things at the same time and that person is great at it. But actually it doesn't work like that. And the proof of that, if you look at the music industry or you look at movies, typically those talented musicians or directors, they're not known for other things that they do, other hobbies that they might have, because they're just not as good in those hobbies as they are in their main artistic pursuit. And so this is the same for everybody else. Unfortunately, we can't do everything. We need to focus our energy, focus our time on something specific, and then hopefully that will maybe trigger us to go into different disciplines, but it certainly starts with something one. And so in those instances where there's more than one talent or a passion that you might possess, it's worthwhile going deep into your psyche and trying to figure out, well, which one, if I would do it for a long haul, which one of those things would make me more excited? There should be some kind of thing in your head that tells you, that makes you a bit more excited about one rather than another. And sometimes that's not there at all, and it's very difficult to think of something that would be like that. And in those cases, coming back to this idea of creative habit, what would be useful to do is to try something that you think you might enjoy. So for example, I try to do drawings for 2 months. Every day I would sit down and I would sketch something out in my sketchbook, and I would give it a sufficient amount of time for those 2 months. Every evening I would give this pursuit sufficient amount of time to just test whether I like it or not, because I used to like drawing a lot when I was younger, and that's partially the reason why I started doing architecture, because I like drawing, I like exploring ideas. But what I realized in those 2 months is that actually, drawing from nature, drawing things that I see, sketching things around me, sketching the environment, is not really what I want to do. I'm more interested in ideas and how I can create something out of nothing rather than illustrate something that I can see outside. So what this really showed me is that, I'm more of an ideas person, and the drawing is not a tool of expression for me. It's a tool of communication, getting my ideas out on the paper and out there in the real world, building buildings or doing product design or whatnot, getting physical objects out there. And drawing method, the drawing sketching approach, is really just a method of getting those ideas and articulating them. And so for you, it's also worthwhile to test, if it's music that you're passionate, can you actually sit down every day and play music? Sit down in the same place, produce something, and then see if you're like it. And unfortunately, there's no kind of way to tell if that's going to work or not. Only thing you can really do is to say, okay, I'm going to set myself 2 weeks to do that specific thing. I'm going to do music. I'm not going to do anything else. I'm just going to be focusing on, learning how to play piano or learning how to produce something. And then fingers crossed, I'm going to like it. But there's no way to know that up front. There's no way to know if you're going to be good at it. But not doing it is worse than doing it badly. So my advice here would be, when it comes to picking up something specific, it's really about trying different things and seeing what sticks or not. Also worth seeking for some kind of feedback. If we are doing this music thing and we find ourselves progressing well and quite enjoy it, and it might be something that we might want to become actually quite good or even professional at that point, automatically we need to start and looking if we can get some kind of feedback for people who are in front of us, who are better at us and can give us constructive feedback. So I hope you found this video interesting. Hit the like button if you did, and I hope to see you again soon.